Okay, thanks for coming. I did my venture grant project looking at Ibogaine treatment for opiate addiction in Vancouver, or outside of Vancouver, BC. I actually did this in September, but I wanted to be able to follow up with the client at about the 6-month mark to kind of see where he had been in his journey. So that's why I'm presenting it to you now. I'm curious, how many of you here are at least vaguely familiar with what Ibogaine is? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm going to give some background information. I've got a couple videos to show. Then I'll go more in depth with what I did in the study, which was just an observational study of an Ibogaine treatment. And then at the end, I'll have Q&A, and I have someone here. I haven't had the Ibogaine experience myself, but I have someone here who has, so you can ask her questions or ask me questions. This is one of my psychology heroes, Gabor Mate. He says, Ibogaine is a plant with nearly miraculous properties in the treatment and healing of opiate addictions. In the right hands, in the right context, actually and potentially far more rapid in effect and far more helpful than any pharmaceutical devised by mainstream science. Pretty strong claim, right? I guess going into this, I'd heard a lot of really kind of strong claims that Ibogaine was this miraculous substance that could help people recover from like a lifetime of addiction, an intractable condition, opiate addiction. And I wanted to see for myself if that were really possible. Even though I'd read a lot about it, I'd looked at the research, it just kind of didn't seem true. This in particular was interesting to me. People with opiate addiction have been in my life. Most key, my father had an opiate addiction during the early part of my life, so I have a particular interest in helping to treat people with addiction. And then also, I got interested in the sort of healing potential of the visionary plants when I was in Peru. I did my study abroad there in undergrad, and like meeting the curanderos there and learning about ayahuasca and that sort of thing really opened me up to this idea. So just a little bit of background. According to NIH, 9.35% of the US population is afflicted by substance use disorder. Heroin use has been on the rise since 2007 with about 669,000 users in 2012, including 156,000 first-time users. I say it's not just for urban areas anymore. I actually just recently saw a cable television program about drug use in Seattle, and a big part of this program was talking about how in the Seattle area, or at least in the suburban areas of Seattle, in the younger population, heroin use is on the rise. Interesting. But it's one of the most impactful drug abuse issues in many areas across the country, as long-term use leads to severe health problems and is costly to taxpayers. So what is Iboga? It is a plant medicine revered in West Central Africa's Bwiti spiritual tradition, especially in Gabon. There's days-long ceremonies for rites of passage, initiation, healing, and driving out malevolent spirits. The substance itself is a root bark. You eat it, and it produces a dissociative, visionary, introspective state, and often leads to insights into personal development. So I have a short video that I'll show of the Bwiti. This is from a documentary called Ibogaine Rites of Passage. I recommend that you see it if this is interesting to you.
Le guérisseur qui travaille avec un patient doit d'abord le lire. À partir du moment où il lit le patient, il sait que telle personne a un problème là, 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 là. Et donc, quand il va travailler avec lui, bon, il sait que je dois travailler avec lui comme ça, comme ça, comme ça, parce que quelque part, lui, il a tel et tel problème. Il faudrait que ça s'adapte comme ça pour lui. Et c'est pour ça que le travail de l'Iboga est bien ciblé et bien cadré, selon les personnes, comme je disais tout à l'heure. C'est-à-dire que chaque personne a un traitement bien défini pour soi. Pendant l'initiation, on te prend un miroir, on te le pose devant toi, on te maquille. À partir de ce moment-là, tu regardes dans le miroir. Donc, à partir de là, tu vas commencer à percevoir ta double personnalité. Donc, tu rentres dans le miroir, tu te traverses, puisque tu as toi en face de toi. Tu pénètres à l'intérieur de toi-même pour voir exactement qui tu es à l'intérieur de toi-même.
And so Ibogaine has grown in underground popularity as an alternative treatment to addiction here in the U.S. The story behind that is that in 1962, a 19-year-old heroin addict named Howard Lotsoff tries Ibogaine, just intending to get high with a group of friends. And they inadvertently discover that they no longer have cravings for heroin or cocaine after doing it and cease using all drugs completely. He went on later to become a researcher looking into this. In 1970, Ibogaine becomes a Schedule I hallucinogenic drug in the US, meaning it has no medical benefit and a high potential for abuse. Today, it's illegal in the US, but it is offered by several underground practitioners. One of those that's more well known is Dimitri Mugianis, whose story is pretty interesting. He was a heroin addict. His wife actually died, she OD'd, and he learned about Ibogaine. He got really into doing the treatments. He actually went to Africa and studied with the Bwiti, was initiated. And in recent years, I'm not sure exactly when, but he was arrested by, I think someone went undercover and caught him trying to do a treatment. He was arrested, and what happened when he went to court was several people came who had been treated by him, just like a line of people came, and gave testimony saying, this guy saved my life. And the judge ended up giving him a reduced sentence because of that, because it was such a moving display. So there's legal clinics in Canada, Mexico, parts of Europe. Also, well, in Canada where I did this study, Ibogaine is seen as it's treated like a health supplement. In Mexico, I think it's regulated as an experimental treatment, but it's different in different parts of the world. Recently, the Republic of Gabon declared it a national treasure. There's a study underway in New Zealand. There was a recent study in Mexico and also Canada, and I think the University of Miami, they did a study offshore somewhere. So people are looking into this, but still illegal here, still seen as not having a medical benefit. So compared to other psychedelics, Ibogaine has a very high risk profile. The number that I saw online was that about 1 in 300 treatments result in death. Risk is increased by pre-existing heart conditions. Ibogaine really affects your heart. That actually happened in the treatment that we were in. Our client had a unusually low heart rate for a long time. It was a little bit scary, but ended up being okay. So you definitely want to have people there that are trained, medically trained, to be able to catch this kind of thing, help you with it. Also, using opiates with Ibogaine or shortly after, because like what they think happens is that Ibogaine wipes the opioid receptors. If you were to go back to using whatever your usual dose of opiates were after that, it would be, you wouldn't have your tolerance anymore, and so that can be really dangerous in terms of an OD risk. Also, using the root bark like they're doing in the video instead of the extract, which is called Ibogaine HCl, is seen to be more dangerous. And of course, taking Ibogaine outside of clinical facilities. I say also that it's not safe for treatment of benzodiazepine addiction, basically because of how that affects your heart. The Ibogaine changes your heart rate way too fast to really be able to recover. They do treat benzo addiction with Ibogaine, but it's a lot more dangerous. So the treatment center that I went to is just outside of Vancouver. I was there for a week, which is about the duration of one Ibogaine treatment. It's called Liberty Root, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about that. It's run out of a residence. There used to be more clinics in Vancouver, but they've been closed. But it's a nice place. They had, walking trails. You have access to a hot tub. They make like organic vegetarian meals. The setup is here, very simple, right? The dark bedroom, bucket, eye mask, maybe headphones. They don't really do a lot of the, traditional stuff. It's not really ceremonialized here at this clinic, although some of them do. Sweet little therapy dogs that they have in the house, and then there's they have a nurse come that's there during the whole part of the flood treatment in case anything happens, like taking vitals and everything, so they have all that equipment there. So pretty simple. Their sort of philosophy there, which they say again and again and again, and it's sort of wanting to dispel the idea that Ibogaine is just going to cure people. It's not a silver bullet, they always say, because you really have to be ready to stop using. There's always risk factors. It will interrupt addiction. That's what it does. It interrupts addiction. But and there is a spiritual component, the psychospiritual component. But you're still running the risk if you're still in environments where you have access to your substance and that sort of thing. If you're exposed to the same sort of triggers that were in place before. But they said, when I talked to them last, they said right now they think about 2 out of every 3 of the clients that they've treated is no longer using. So it's run by 2 guys, Trevor and Gareth. I spent more time with Gareth. His story is interesting. He actually used to be an alcoholic, and he had an experience with LSD that helped him to beat alcoholism. And then later on, he did an Ibogaine treatment, and the spirit of Ibogaine, or however you want to think of it, actually told him that he needed to be doing this work. So they do have a nurse that sits through the entire flood. The flood is where you get your really heavy dose of Ibogaine, and that's when the receptors are supposedly flushed. They also have female staff come in if there's a female client, which is interesting because I guess they see that a lot of female addicts have sexual trauma, and so they don't want to re-traumatize by having them, in a dissociative state with only men around, so they have a woman come for those treatments. And then they also have a body worker there helping the client after the flood. Then to get into the client is super nice guy. I feel really happy to have met him. He's just, he's in his, I would say, late 30s, young Canadian business owner, really into yoga. He actually had a lot of experience with psychedelics before. He had a very dedicated ayahuasca practice. He actually said that when he started using opiates, that ayahuasca, he would do his ayahuasca ceremonies, and it was very angry with him, and he wasn't able to deal with that, so he quit doing ayahuasca and then moved completely into opiates. He had a very expensive habit, hundreds of dollars a day spent on fentanyl as well as methadone. And let's see. And that had been going on for about 3 years, and he'd tried doing a methadone taper, he'd tried quitting cold turkey multiple times, but not able to stay off the drugs. He had a family history of mental health problems and a personal history of depression. And really his drug use was triggered by financial problems around, my understanding is there was some sort of bad financial investment and he didn't feel like his heart was in the work. And so anything coming up in terms of the business or money would trigger drug use again. So the treatment itself is, sort of uneventful because you have this person that's there in sort of a dreamlike state for days. My role, though, was, emotional support, kind of an observer, a volunteer role, helping out with cooking the meals, doing errands, taking the client on walks at times. It was also interesting to meet with people who came in to do like consultations because they were interested in having the Ibogaine treatment themselves and sort of seeing that angle. And then also clients came who had already been through it. So seeing people that were far down the road, people that were, not quite there yet. So what happens in an Ibogaine treatment? First, you have to do an EKG and blood work. There's like an informed consent process and you sign a patient bill of rights. If any of this doesn't happen, it's kind of too risky. You take on a lot of risk treating because of the potential dangers with the treatment. At this particular clinic, and I think at other clinics, they do what they call a stepladder approach. So, methadone is a lot harder to detox than other opiates. So what they'll do is the client will wean themselves off methadone onto an opiate such as morphine, which is easier to detox. And then do smaller doses of Ibogaine to start, and then bigger and bigger Ibogaine doses until the flood. That also they think helps with safety because it's not such a shock to the system, and it's also a deterrent against people who might secretly be using their substance, which can be very dangerous, as mentioned before. At this clinic, they do a mixture of the root bark and the Ibogaine HCl. So like I said, the synthetic is safer, but the root bark, I guess they want to have the actual plant material be part of it. The client is helped to do gentle exercise to help with the withdrawal symptoms, which are like very severe aches, discomfort, disturbed sleep, lots of sneezing, runny nose, depression comes up, negative self-talk. And then also the client will be given booster doses after their treatment. Oh yeah, so for context, an Ibogaine treatment, the whole thing can be, anywhere from like 2 days to a week long. If you're detoxing cold turkey, then that's about 1 week of acute withdrawal, and then three months of post-acute withdrawal where the depression really can hit. And the best case scenario, what you're kind of hoping for, is that the Ibogaine fast tracks you through the acute withdrawal, and then the post-acute withdrawal is significantly shortened because of, the psychospiritual aspect of the substance, of the medicine. Our client, I'm not sure how unusual this is, but he didn't really have a lot of visions during his treatment. At the beginning, he had really strong themes of like slavery, feeling a lot of, I guess, empathy toward the idea of slavery and feeling like he himself had been a slave to this drug. In the beginning, like in the smaller doses, he had really high spirits and was very hopeful. He very early on realized that like the concept of drugs was moving further and further away from his reality. But during the flood dose, when he would get up, you could tell he was really struggling with depression and negativity. But toward the end, he said, I feel like right now in my reality, taking pills is not even a concept. Oh, I actually have a picture from that. It's funny, we went to get frozen yogurt at the end of his treatment, and he got this crazy colorful thing, which I don't think he even ate, but it was just like he was seeing colors for the first time and like going out in the world for the first time again. And so this to him was just like very delightful. But yeah, they started to realize towards the end of his treatment that there were going to be problems because he was on the phone talking to people working on his financial stuff, and it just seemed like he was being triggered again. So he ended up staying a little bit longer, and he relapsed 1 week later, unfortunately. Let's see. I have some quotes from him. He says this much more eloquently than I could. I didn't expect to be so exhausted, mostly physically. I don't know why I expected to be more energized after taking pills for over 3 years. Although the pills felt far away, they weren't. All of my stresses were there in full force, my dealer only a call away. There's definitely something to be said for putting more time between the addict and his poison. More time away from my reasons for using ended up being key for me. I got treated a second time and it has mostly stuck. Except for a few weeks when my business was going under, I haven't used since early December. So you're definitely seeing with this that if the triggers are not removed, if there's not some time in between whatever was causing the problem and the treatment, then it's really easy to go right back into it. And I actually really appreciate that this is what happened, because I hope that if anyone is thinking of recommending this treatment to someone, that this information is in the background. It's so important. But yeah, so he had his second treatment, and I asked him, So he says, I didn't expect to feel so far beyond the cravings, both psychologically and physically. It was profound. Not only were there no cravings, but I couldn't even imagine taking a pill. But I did definitely remember being enslaved by them, and so I felt free and very far away from them. I thought it was interesting that he brought up the idea of being enslaved, because that had been, this was 6 months later, and still that part of his vision, he had very few visions, but that one was strong. He said he had insights, but that was the main vision, and for that to still be impacting the way that he envisioned this, I thought was interesting. But I asked him if he would recommend the treatment to others. He said, of course, it works. It's way better than a week of withdrawal. It's better than a methadone taper because the iboga eliminates almost entirely every single withdrawal symptom and does so for weeks and months. It's not exactly comfortable, which is part of its elegance, but it beats the hell out of anything else I've tried. There's still work to do, but the physical and mental withdrawals are completely gone. Okay. And I asked him what are his plans? He says he's wrapping up. Actually, I think he's already wrapped up the business. He doesn't have it anymore. He's just doing hiking, yoga, working out, taking time away, trying to get back into a positive headspace, and just finding a new sense of purpose and meaning, which can, be lost during opiate addiction. He also made it impossible to call his dealer and doesn't see relapse happening at this point. He says one relapse was nightmare enough. So I have a list of resources here if you want to find out more about this. There's a lot of research going on right now through MAPS. So if you go to maps.org, that's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They have a lot of information on their website. It's super useful. Then also I showed a clip from the documentary Ibogaine Rite of Passage. There's a book, Iboga, the Visionary Root of African Shamanism. Also, if you go to this website, myiboga.org, there's a list of providers. They have an Ibogaine conference called Spirit Plant Medicine. The clinic that I was at is called Liberty Root. And there's my email if you want to message me about it. Also, if this is something that really piques your interest, I just found out that CIS in San Francisco is now offering, or they'll be offering next year, a certificate program for licensed therapists in psychedelic therapy and research. Okay, so I have I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I also have someone here that's had the Ibogaine experience, if it might be helpful to ask questions to her directly, because I haven't. I'll give a little bit of background information about her. So she has alcoholism in her family. Both parents and all 4 grandparents dealt with alcohol issues, and her history with alcohol began early on in adolescence, and then opiate abuse began later. She works as an ARMP. At one point, she actually lost her license and had to go through a huge process to get it back because of opiate use. She was able to curb her addictive patterns through inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, and going to the 12-step programs. But before her Ibogaine treatment, still felt there was like a void that wasn't filled, that used to be filled by addiction. And the summer before her October treatment, she was feeling a lot of warning signs of relapse. So she went to a treatment center in Mexico, and afterwards felt a lot more energetic and more proactive. The story really is compelling to me because after this, because of that sort of proactive, Ibogaine is supposed to help people with depression, right? So she felt a lot more proactive than she ever did before. When she got a cough in January, she did something she wouldn't normally do. If she had a cough, she actually went and got a chest x-ray. And they ended up seeing a tumor. And she had a diagnosis of stage 3A cancer, lung cancer. But because it was caught early enough, and then through a series of fortunate events, really too numerous to list, she was able to get treatment at NIH, and it's 2 years with clear scans now. So it's not, I don't want to say that Ibogaine, saved her life, but it was this really pivotal sort of turning point that kind of changed her way of thinking and definitely filled that void and helped her to be on the path where she was taking better care of herself and now kind of feels this new lease on life. She can maybe explain that more to you later. I think it's really impressive that she was prescribed during her treatment opiates, benzos, sleeping pills. She took them home, normally would have taken all of them, and flushed them down the toilet. So, yeah. Oh, and the doctors at NIH, who are like big-time cancer researchers, said that she tolerated the chemo and radiation better than anyone they'd ever seen before. So I'll open up to Q&A now. Carrie, you come.
In my experience itself, wasn't easy either, but it's now been, I think, 2 years, and I have to say I've battled alcoholism from day one. Never did heroin, but that would have been my drug of choice, but I had access to Dilaudid. Today I can sit here and say there is no desire, no craving, nothing to drink, to drug, and I've done it, intermittently all my life. And it is significant because when I was at NIH, they gave me a pharmacy and it was all justified because I had lung cancer, just tons and tons of pills. And the fact that I was able to come home and I just dumped them all down the toilet, where in times past, I would have felt like I was in a candy store. But the experience itself, I had a little bit of graphic visualizations at first. And the actual experience, I felt like I slept through a lot of it. But what is significant is they say with Ibogaine, you kind of categorize everything in your life. And what I remember is a line of people, and during the experience it felt like every single individual I have ever known, ever met, ever influenced me in my entire life just lined up. And then two people stepped out of the line, and they were my children as toddlers. And so when Katy and I were talking about the experience, it was like why my children as toddlers were the only two that stepped out of the line. We kind of thought, well, maybe that's because they didn't, I'm their mother, so they didn't really influence my decisions, my bad choices I made. for so long and for so many years. The Ibogaine was the turning point in my life, and it saved my life. It allowed me, like Katy said, to be proactive in my health, and it's like I just had a sense something was wrong, and something was very wrong. And I sit here today, you know, it's been almost 2 years, and very grateful, very thankful. But you know, definitely as far as the addiction parts, it has wiped that out of my life. So, thank you.
Are there any questions? Yeah.
What does a treatment like this normally cost for like the whole week, like inpatient?
Yeah, it's pretty pricey. Normally about $3,000.
Yeah, I paid $2,500.
Okay.
And it really did mess, I mean, my heart and my blood pressure was so high at one point. They had me drink cannabis because they were going to stop the entire thing if my blood pressure and everything didn't come down. But, you know, $2,500 in a lifetime of dealing with addiction is nothing.
That's what people often say in the
Yeah.
testimonies. I mean, people spend so much money going to those inpatient treatment centers. My father went to 3 months of inpatient treatment. You know, it's very costly, not to mention all the health problems and you know, everything.
And
The
the
habit itself,
psychosocial.
is can be very expensive.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So would you say that it made you, because you said it made you more aware of your body, you think that's kind of the primary reason that it may work, aside from like the pharmacological aspects of it? Like it really made you aware of like yourself and your
Absolutely.
surroundings?
Because what had happened, it was on a Sunday, and for a 24-hour period, and this was after the Ibogaine, but I had a sense of doom. Not panic, but just doom. And I remember going to work the next day, and one of the docs I worked with, she's like, "So how's your day going, Carrie?" And I'm like, you know, I have this sense of doom that will not lift, that I've never experienced before. And it was the following Tuesday, I went and had the chest x-ray done, and I just ran across the street. They were only $25, so I had it done. But it made me, something was so different. And I truly caught the cancer in the nick of time, because it was 3A, it was in lymph nodes, and then wonderfully got treated at NIH. But yeah, it just this awareness came from it that wasn't there before. Yeah.
I'd like to ask both of you if you think that lower doses could be beneficial, since the high dose could be so potentially dangerous.
The client that we treated was treated with lower doses early on, and they do it by weight and things. And if you have a health condition, I mean, you were taking thyroid medication, and so that was a consideration. Like ideally you get your medical workup, and the people who are working with you hopefully have a lot of experience with this, and they kind of know going in. There's certain conditions where it's just not going to be possible, right? But I think it can be helpful, because the client we treated in the Vancouver area, he definitely was noticing getting further and further away from his addiction, even with the test dose.
And they offered to, like down the road, if I felt I needed like a booster,
Right.
that I was able to get that, but I didn't need it. And so the booster would have been a much lower dose.
You mentioned that the Ibogaine sort of changed that feeling of void, filling that void where the addiction was, or use of the substance. And has that experience stayed, or has it changed, or?
It's definitely gone. I will say twice since then I have drank, like on 2 occasions, and just felt horrible about it. Have no desire. I drank and drugged to escape, you know, as you know, addiction is very complex. But I was always searching, always searching. That's gone. I do not have that void. And getting through the whole cancer treatment, I had radiation, chemo, surgery. I did it in this magnificently extraordinary way that prior to the Ibogaine, I would have taken the drugs they gave me for free. I changed my eating habits, I exercised every day. I didn't get sick once with the chemo. And I attribute that to the Ibogaine experience like 2 months prior that just shifted. And I can't tell you like exactly what shifted. I just know there's been a shift. There was a shift, a huge shift. I mean, I'm kind of old and I've been dealing with it, all my life. So it's a huge shift. Yeah.
An interesting thing I think about like what shifts when you take Ibogaine is like they still don't actually really understand it fully. The research trials are controlled. It's not really freely done. The molecule itself is much more complex than most of the psychedelic compounds. And so like the mechanism of action is still not fully understood. So if anyone is into that area of research, this could be a possible avenue. I mean, they're trying to understand the sort of the mystical component. There's studies right now that MAPS is conducting trying to understand the mystical component of these experiences and how that impacts people. But of course, that's, subjective and sort of a new area.
Were there any benefits outside of the addiction pattern?
Oh, the biggest thing that came out of it, I forgot, and it's the most bizarre thing. I've never been able to manage money, ever. I'd spend, and I made good money, and I'd spend every last dime, even if it was at Walgreens. I mean, didn't pay my bills on time, would be driving like a crazy woman to get the water turned back on when the kids were little, stuff like that. I have paid my bills on time. I got credit cards now, and I don't know why that happened, but that was a huge difference too. The whole money thing just completely changed, and I can't explain that at all. I have no idea where that came from. So that was kind of a positive thing as well. Yeah.
I was wondering if Liberty Root in their tapering process had ever considered using kratom in that process instead of morphine or whatever else they might use.
They did mention that. That sounds familiar to me, but I don't know enough about it. Do you want to talk about that?
I was just more curious if they had thought about using it. I mean, it's an alkaloid that acts on opioid receptors as well, and a lot of people do use it as a way to try to taper off certain opioid medications. So I was wondering.
Yeah, they definitely mentioned that. I don't know if it's happening now, but I know that they're in a pretty small space now, and I know they're trying to move into a bigger space with a larger group of people that are doing this kind of work. And I think they want to get as many of the available treatments, available alternative treatments there as possible. So I think that's probably something that they're looking into. Although, don't quote me.
I actually heard that there's like a kratom coffee bar on the East Coast that you can now go to. And a lot of people who are former opiate addicts go there.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is that similar to like naltrexone, or
I don't know what drugs.
like to block the receptors?
I don't think so. I think it still binds to them.
Oh, okay.
So if anything, maybe it's competing, but I'm not entirely sure.
Any more questions?
How old was that in that rites of passage? How old was that female?
I'm not sure. It doesn't say. She seems older though, right? That documentary is great. Has anyone seen it? It's online for free. It's really easy to find online. It's very good. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.